And okay, we are live with another Tech Talk. Today's Tech Talk is, what did I call it? Canvas course settings, every period, single period, one of them. So I set myself a challenge to, because when you're in Canvas and you're looking at your Canvas course and you're looking at your settings, there is such a long list of things that you can turn on, turn off, change, options you can choose from. Some of them are obvious, some of them are not. So I set myself a challenge to try to go through every single one of those, at least briefly, and then also provide you a little annotated guide at the end that you can keep in your back pocket for what every single one of these things do. So I'm going to share a link in the chat for people on Zoom, and I'll put it in the description on YouTube later on for people that watch the recording. But this is a Google Doc that goes to a nice little Google document that I invite you to open up and follow along with. I have it color-coded, and speaking of color navigation, color-coded and symbol-coded in kind of 4 different categories as we go through the course settings. And the first category is green light. These are settings that I think you should look at and consider changing in most of your courses in most circumstances. Yellow light is things that some instructors in very specific situations might have reasons to change, but only with careful consideration given the context of your class. Then there are red lights, things that we do not recommend that you change hardly ever. And if you think you might want to change them, come and talk to one of us first, and we'll work through whether that is a good solution for you. And then lastly, the blue diamond is just, there are settings in the Canvas course settings that you cannot change, but they are still visible. So I'll just briefly explain what they are and why you don't need to worry about them, basically. So let me do a screen share. I'm going to open up a Canvas course. I want this one right there. And I want to share that. Okay, can you see my Canvas course now? Well, I can't see Zoom now, so I don't know if anybody said yes or not.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Tom. All right, so I'm in Canvas. I am impersonating a instructor account. I had to do that because our accounts as admins, we have access to change settings that you do not have the ability to change. So I wanted to make sure that this accurately reflects what you see. And then this is also a fresh course. So the settings should be the same as the default course settings that you are given every time a new course is added into your Canvas dashboard. So I'm just going to kind of work my way down on these course settings. The first one, the course image. If you do not already add a course image to your course, I strongly recommend that you add a course image to your course. Is a little tile that shows up on the dashboard for both you and your students. It could be a nice image of nature. It could be a piece of art. In a better world, maybe something that is related to the content area that you teach. So a map for geography, some mineral outcroppings for geology, spreadsheet, I don't know, whatever. But you can add an image to this. It's very simple to do that. Upload an image. Canvas does have a suggested image size, and I have that in the Google Doc. You can look at that as a reference later on. But really, you can add pretty much any rectangular image you want, and it will crop and resize it appropriately. If it's a very different shape than this, then it's going to crop it, and you may lose information that way, visual information. So play with it. Get in there and play with it. The other thing that's cool about images, you can add animated GIFs, not just static images. I don't know if everybody knows that. And I don't know if everybody should do that all the time, but sometimes you can do a fun little slightly animated image if you wanted to. Okay, going down the list. Name and course code. You do not have the ability to change these things. We have had instructors ask about this in the past, and I think when Jerry was here, sometimes he would change course names for you. We don't really recommend that or do that anymore, though, because it makes our job harder in terms of data management, in terms of troubleshooting when a problem comes up, when we need to find and look up a course. If we change that course code, that causes a problem. The reason instructors sometimes wish they could change that is if they have like a morning section and an afternoon section of the same class in one term. And they think, oh, I wish I could just change the name to change that. We have some other ideas for helping you get organized with those things that we don't have time for right now. But that if that's a problem for you, shoot one of us an email and we can kind of help you brainstorm solutions that do not involve changing the actual course code of the course.
Quick and dirty, just make it your image.
Yes, absolutely. You can just change the image. Yeah. Put a sunrise on your morning course and a sunset. Yeah, something like that.
Or the name.
Or the name. You can put the name in the image. You certainly could. Absolutely. Okay. The next one, blueprint courses and course templates. Again, you can't change these. These are tools that we have available that some departments have used for very specific purposes. But for you as a daily instructor, probably you don't need to mess with these. Again, if that's something you're curious about, you can come to talk to us. So that's one of those name, course code, blueprints, and course templates. Those are all in my blue category of you can't change it, so you probably don't need to worry about it. Time zone. This is a red light for me. Please don't change the time zone of your course, because if you do that, it's gonna change I think it's gonna change the time zone of all the assignment due dates in your class. So if you are changing this to Eastern time, then that's going to shift all of your due dates by 4 hours, I think. So it's going to show 11:59 p.m. on the course, but that's actually going to be 4 a.m. Pacific time, I think. I can't. Anyway, just don't do it.
Other way around.
Other way around. Thank you. Other way around.
This is why you shouldn't do it.
Just don't do it. Don't mess with that. Just leave it Pacific time zone. That's where all of our students are. Most of our students are. That's where most of our instructors are. Just leave it Pacific time zone. Please do not change it.
Well, and with that, if a student is in a different time zone, it will adjust that according for them, right, when they access.
As long as they change their time zone in their user account, yes.
Okay, thank you.
So on the user's end, not on the instructor's end.
Yes, so just please don't mess with it. Sub accounts and terms, again, you cannot change these yourself. And we don't recommend that you change them even if you could, because that determines the start and end date of the course. When the course starts, when the course concludes. That brings us to the participation section, which is complicated and messy. And right now, our suggestion is please don't. Please don't change those. And I can tell you why. I think a lot of people misunderstand the difference between term participation and course participation. And Tom, please interrupt me if I get any of this part wrong. It's not super intuitive, but as soon as a course is published, this is an unpublished course in the spring quarter. Let's say this was in summer quarter. The quarter hadn't started yet. As soon as I publish this, it is visible to students who are enrolled in the class. And changing the start and end date of the class by changing this to custom start dates does not change that visibility. Normally the only thing that changes visibility is the published status of the course. Unless you change the start date and click restrict students from viewing course before term start date. But just don't do that. Just if you're not ready for students to see the course, do not publish the course yet. That being said, it is good practice to publish your course early if you are able to, especially if you have like the course syllabus, maybe a welcome video, maybe an intro module that you'd like them to see early, then by all means, publish just those things and then publish the course and do it a week or two early. I think that's good practice. You don't have to publish all of your course modules yet if you're not ready for your students to see those. But I wouldn't use the start and end dates and changing the participation to course as a way of doing that. What the start and end dates do control is whether students can do things in the class, whether they can start submitting assignments and taking tests or not. That's what the start and end date does. And really, you shouldn't be expecting your students to do work in a class before the start of the term anyway. That should not be an expectation that we have for students. So I think I think best practice would be to publish at least some starting intro welcome materials early in the course, but don't expect students to do work until the term begins. So that's why I say for all these participation things, the term, the start date, the end date, these restrictions, just don't mess with those. If you think you need to mess with them for some reason, or if you have a situation with an incomplete student, come and talk to us and we will help you handle that the right way. Did I cover that generally right, Tom? Would you want to add anything on that section or not?
Yeah, that's it. Like the participation settings are about participation, almost exclusively about participation and not about visibility of the course.
Right.
Like if you were to check the box there, leave it at term and check the box to restrict students from viewing the course before the term start and then publish your course, the students wouldn't be able to see the course in read-only mode. They would only be able to see, they wouldn't be able to see it until the term started, and then they would be able to interact with it. Right.
Which-
But those check boxes are about visibility and not participation.
And I
Yeah.
wouldn't want instructors to mess with that, because then what the instructor is seeing and what the student are seeing is no longer congruent, because the instructor would see that the course is published, but they may have forgotten that they checked that restrict button.
Yeah.
Course is visible to the student, the instructor is published, it is not visible to the student. So yeah, absolutely. Okay, that's all I'm gonna say.
Once in a while you get a student the following quarter saying, can you remove this for me? That they're seeing old courses on Canvas and they don't want to see them anymore. Merely leaving this as term takes care of that problem?
Correct.
Yes.
Yep. Once the end of the term hits, in this case, that June 24th, it falls off of the student's dashboard entirely. The times that students complain about that are usually when an instructor changed the end date of that term, and perhaps forgot that they did that. I've seen that happen where they changed the course because they want to change the date, and then they forgot that they did that, and then it's too late because the course
So what's the difference between that and restrict students from viewing after end date?
That's a good question. Tom, do you know the answer to that one? I don't know that one benefits students at all.
So the restrict students from viewing course after term end date makes the course completely invisible to students. So when the term expires, the course rolls to a read-only state. So students can go back and look at their previous courses. Even though it drops off of their dashboard, it goes into their all courses list. So they can see it under past enrollments. If you check the restrict from viewing after term end date, it vanishes completely from their instructional record. Like for them, they can't see it. So I'm taking classes at an institution right now that does that. So as soon as the term is over, my courses vanish, which I find really like disconcerting. I don't know why. I find it very disorienting, but that was their choice. We do currently have a checkbox set so that students cannot view their quiz results after the term is over. So for people who are reliant on sort of closed-ended response items in their quizzes, that they might be doing like multiple choice or true false with high stakes testing or whatever, and they're worried that their students might cheat or might go back in later and like look at stuff and share things with friends. That checkbox is set at the account level, so students can't, once the course is over, students can't see quiz responses anymore, regardless of how visible other stuff is.
Okay.
So
all right, I want to move forward because I only have 10 minutes for the rest of these settings, so I'm going to do my best. Default due time. I have this one listed as a green light if you want to change this, because the default setting is every time you make an assignment and you give it a due date, start date, or end date, the time that it sets defaults to 11:59 p.m. That's a perfectly good default because it's the end of the day, but it avoids the confusion between midnight and noon, right? 11:59. But you may not want that as your default due time on an assignment. Maybe you want it to be in the morning. Maybe you want it to be before class starts. And you can always change that on a per assignment basis, but you can also change it on the course's default. So let's say my class is at 7 a.m. and I want my students to have until class starts to submit their homework. I can just change the default due time in this class, and then all future assignments and due dates that I set, that's what it will default to. So I think that's not a bad feature to have. Okay, language. You should almost never touch this, and here's why. The language refers to the interface language. So dashboard, courses, calendar, home announcements, all these things, that is set at the account level for students. So a student can go into their account and change their system language, and it will reflect that change. However, in your course, if you change this, let's say I changed it to English, then any of my students who had a different language set as their system language, it would override that, and they wouldn't be able to use their own language for that. So I would not mess with this and just set it to user configurable, which is the default setting. In other words, it follows what the individual user's account settings are set to. All right, moving forward, file storage. You do have a file size limit on a course. It's a pretty generous limit. That's a fair amount of space. The only time you are probably likely to bump up against that limit is if you have lots and lots of video files uploaded to the course. That's one of the reasons we recommend you just put your videos in Panopto anyway, because Panopto does not impact your file size limit for the course. You can have as many videos as long as you want attached to your course through Panopto, and it won't affect your file size limit.
And that's if they're embedded or linked, either way?
If it is hosted on Panopto and either embedded or linked, it does not fill up the file size storage for the class. Correct. All right, large course is a setting that we have in here. If this is turned on in SpeedGrader, it changes the way the students are organized in your list of SpeedGrader, and it just shows one group of students at a time. This is helpful for like big courses at big universities where there's 150 students in the class and you have 5 TAs and each TA is responsible for a group of students. That's a situation where you probably want to use that. Not really a situation that comes up for us. So I think I have that one listed as a yellow light. Because you could, I guess, if you make heavy use of student groups for student group activities, might be something you could think about. But for most people, I don't think you want to mess with that. Grading scheme. If you turn this on, you can change the grading scheme. This is complicated. I don't have time to talk about it right now. We did do a tech talk on this a couple of years ago, and there is a link in that Google document under the grading scheme thing where we talk about that. I have that as a yellow light because that is kind of a complex system that you could use if you wanted to, especially if you're doing some kind of non-traditional grading system in your class. But I wouldn't play around with this lightly. Maybe come and talk to us if you want to do anything with custom grading. License. I think it actually defaults to private copyrighted. You can change the setting if you want, but maybe consult with us first. So by default in Canvas, but also by default in your instructor contract, and by default in American intellectual property law, anything you publish is copyrighted. You own a copyright to your material unless you created it under a special project contract for the college or something like that. But if it's just under the normal process of your teaching load, it is your content and it is copyrighted. You could, though, release some of this content as Creative Commons if you want. If you change this, all it does is it puts a little icon on the bottom of your course. I'll show you right here. It just puts a little CC attribution license on the bottom if you change that. I would only mess with this if you are being very, very careful and intentional about making a Creative Commons course. Because if you have material that is not owned by you and is copyrighted by someone else, then you don't have the right to make it Creative Commons. So I have this one as a yellow light. Oh, no, actually I have it as a red light. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I do have this one as a yellow light. You could mess with this if you were doing like some heavy OER work, but maybe talk to us first about it. File copyright. This is kind of related, but what this button does, it's off by default. If you turn this on, I do not recommend this because anytime you try to publish anything in your course, a page, a quiz, an assignment, a link, a little dialog box pops up and says, tell me who owns the copyright for this item. And you have to set the copyright and you have to set the owner or author or the publisher for that item, and then it lets you publish. I would not mess with this. This is maybe for like textbook publishers who are making module content that then they share with people to use if you are licensing from them. I would not play with this button at all. That's a red light. Visibility. This is a red light for credit-bearing courses, at least. Do not set your course to public. If it is a 4 credit on the books course, that's probably a huge FERPA violation waiting to happen. I wouldn't do that.
It actually the student no, so sorry, like the FERPA is not kind of not an issue. Like the visibility, if you set it to public or you set it to institution, it really is just, can people see the content? They were never going to see, they will never ever see student interaction. It does. The reason not to a good reason not to mess with this is that it's very confusing for students if they think they're enrolled in a course, but they get dropped and they go back to the course. And it's set to institution, and they'll go, I can't submit to this. Why can't I submit? Well, because you're not technically in it, right? You're just looking at it.
That's a good clarification, Tom. Thank you. Yeah. So I wouldn't generally mess with this, especially for a course that is on the books for credit. For things like if a department has a template course or something like that, or a guidance course that they want to make available to people without enrolling them, then there might be use cases for that. And you could talk to us about that if you're curious. But I wouldn't mess with that for your live courses. However, you can do this customized visibility, and you can specifically change the visibility of your syllabus. And I think there is some value to that if you use the syllabus tool. And if you wanted to, for example, email the link to your syllabus to your students in CTC Link through your roster, send them a link to the syllabus before the course itself opens. You can do that. It's kind of the same practice as like a liquid syllabus where you have a publicly available syllabus for the course. You can kind of do the same thing with this. So this could have some functionality depending on your situation, but I wouldn't mess with the course visibility. Format and then also description. These are, I have these listed as blue ignore diamonds because they don't do anything for you currently. This information doesn't go anywhere that students can access. This would be if we were using, Tom, I think you said it was the Canvas course catalog.
Yeah, we don't have the public course index or Canvas catalog. So we could enable a public course index, but it's just not something that we do.
So yeah, so currently I wouldn't, just don't worry about them because they don't go anywhere. If you put a description in here, it would not be visible to students anywhere in the system. Mastery paths are probably the brightest yellow we have. It is a tool. I even wrote down a blurb about this one just because it's complicated. Mastery paths are a very complicated system that you can use for automated differentiated instruction. If that sentence appealed to you in any way, come and talk to us and we can talk to you about how mastery paths work. But it is complicated. It's a lot of work to set up. For most instructors, I don't think the value is there. So that's not something that I would recommend for most people. So I have that as a yellow light. Letting students self-enroll. Tom, is that available for live courses or not? I can't remember.
If your course was created by through the CTC Link integration that has students enrolled in it, you will not see that checkbox.
Okay. So this shouldn't show up in your live courses, so you can ignore that. Very good. Showing recent announcements on the course homepage. This to me is a bright green light. I think that everybody should turn this one on personally. Because it is good practice to use announcements, especially for like a weekly overview kind of thing. But most students are not going to be in the habit of going into the announcements tab of the course. But if you turn this on, then the most recent announcements, and you can determine how many, 1, 2, 3, or whatever, those mini announcements show up on the top of the course. And that is whether you use a course homepage or whether you just go straight to the course modules. Either way, those announcements will show up right at the top, big, visible, hard for students to miss. So I recommend that everybody turn this on. And I also recommend people use announcements. But if you do use announcements, definitely turn that on, I would say. Okay, this next set, I'm just going to blast through these all together because they're kind of similar. Let students attach files to discussion. Let students create discussion topics. Let students edit or delete their own discussion replies. Let students organize their own groups. By default, these are enabled. You may have a reason to turn one or more of these off in a course, depending on what you're teaching and how you're teaching it. What I would say though is, if you decide to turn these off, make sure your students know that you've done that, because they may be expecting functionality to exist here because that's the default setting. But if a student in your class is used to being able to go back and correcting or changing one of their discussion topics if they made a mistake or whatever, and they find that they can't do that in your course, that's going to be a source of confusion unless you make it very clear to them that that's happening. So those are yellow lights for me. You could change these for one reason or another, but talk to your students first if you're going to. Hide totals for student grades in the grade summary. That one I have as a yellow light. Some instructors do this, especially if they're doing a non-traditional grading kind of system, where they don't want students to see the final total grade in their grade book, because that may be a misleading number depending on how your grading scheme works. But if you want to go down that road, I strongly recommend you go to one of the Kettle or TLC's non-traditional grading communities of practice. I talked to them about how best to do that, but you can turn that off if you have a reason to. High grade distribution graphs from students. This is a weird one, and we talked about this a little bit. The default is that when students are in their grades, I don't think I have anything to show right now for this. I do have a little screenshot in the Google Doc that goes along with this, though, to show what this looks like. By default, in the student's view of grades, they can click on a little icon next to each grade item, and it'll show them where they fall in the course distribution for that assignment. So they'll see what quartile of grades they are in compared to their classmates. That is on by default. I don't know that I like that personally, because first, I don't think most students would know how to interpret a graph like that unless they've been taught. And second, if they look at that and they see, oh, I'm in the lowest quartile of this class, for some students, that could be highly demotivating, and I would worry about that. That being said, there may be cases where you would want to have that turned on. Maybe it's a math class and you want them to learn about distributions, and this might be a learning tool for them. Or if it's an education class, you might want them to learn about that. But in a lot of cases, I think I would turn the grade distribution graph off by checking off this button to hide it. But by default, those things are visible. Then disable comments on announcements. This is kind of similar to these discussion topic ones. By default, students are able to comment on your announcements. If you want to turn that off for some reason, you could. But again, I would make sure your students understand that you're doing that. Otherwise, that is not going to be the normal functionality for that tool for students. And lastly, this one here is kind of a weird one because the way it is laid out is weird. Right now it says only teachers can create, rename, and edit course pages. You can change that so that your students can create, rename, and edit all of your course pages. I don't think I would do that. That sounds like a recipe for the worst disaster on earth. I don't know why you would have that as a default course setting, but it's there. That being said, there could be cool cases for having specifically student editable pages if you want to do like a wiki kind of assignment or a group project, but you can set that on a per page basis, not on a course basis. So that is a very red light. I do not recommend changing that final setting. And then that brings us to the end. Always update your course details after you make these changes. It's really easy to get this far, think that you have done what you need to do, and then you go back to your course home and you didn't update course details and you didn't save your changes.
Done that one times.
Okay, we went a little over 1:30, but we got through every single course setting option in Canvas. And you have a handy dandy reference guide. And I will put a link to that in the YouTube comment as well, so anybody on YouTube can watch that later. And that's pretty much it.
Well done.
Ooh,
That was a lot.
We made it. Okay. Well, unless we have any questions. Oh, I do have some comments in the chat.
Oh, it's all me.
That's all you
Like, I was just being quiet and like channeling I was trying to be quiet and channel myself into the chat.
Okay.
That's healthy.
Yeah.
When you were like, "Oh, we went a little over 130," I was like, "Yeah, it was my fault because I talked too much." When you asked the question about visibility,
Yeah, but that was on the most complex one. I'm glad we had time to talk about visibility because that one catches people up all the time. So hopefully that was helpful. And then you just said in big capital letters, constructivism in the chat, which I appreciate very much. Okay, well, that does it for today. So I'm going to stop the live stream and we'll see you all next. Is it next week or 2 weeks from now? Are we doing one next week? When is campus development day?
One moment while we try to figure out.
No, it's fine. But at some point, if next week is campus development day, we won't have a tech talk.
We have a tech.
We have a tech talk. Which one is next week?
Control your grade book, part 1, communication.
Ooh, oh, that's
That'll
Thursday.
be me.
Ooh.
All right.
Very excited.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Bye all.